We're live then, are we? Good. Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed having a look around the malt floor with me and Derek. We filmed that a couple of days ago, and hopefully you got the hang of moving around and stuff like that, because it can be quite tricky. You might feel a bit seasick at the end of it. But this is now the kind of Q&A section. So if you had a look at that and wanted to ask some questions, or if you just wanted to ask some questions about anything, then please fire them in just in the comments section. We'll pick them up, and behind the camera there's a group of people usually chuckling and making inappropriate remarks, but they're going to send the questions through to me, and then I'll ask them to Derek. So the first question that we had, which came in during, was about the temperatures of the water. I guess that's particularly related to the steeping, isn't it? So
yeah, so I mean, and again, that depends on the time of year, because the water in the winter, the water we use is hill water, and during the winter it's obviously colder, so it does affect the start of the germination process. Yeah. So we do monitor that temperature, and for example, in the winter we'll probably do 3 steepings, 3 wet stands, okay, and 2 dry stands. In the summer, or in summer months now, in the warmer climate, we're only doing 2 wet stands. So the temperature does affect that initial kickoff of germination. Okay.
And so does that carry through the whole process? So, you know, I guess there are some questions about like the seasonality and, you know, warmer months and the colder months, and how you change what you're doing according to the weather, the climate, humidity.
I think at each stage of the malting process, there's a number of conditions that will affect that germination pace. Yeah. So the temperature, the ambient temperature, the temperature of the concrete on the floor. So we can play about with the conditions. We can alter the thickness of the malt on the floor. We can open the windows to let some cool air in. We can turn the malt. There's many things we can do just to keep that germination process steady and constant.
And how does the temperature between, so say it's 5 degrees outside, what kind of temperature is the layer of the barley itself?
Well, you know, when the malt comes out of the steep and is laid on the floor, we'll start to monitor the temperature straight away. So we'll stick a temperature probe into the body of the malt, and you know, we'll be fairly confident that germination is underway if that temperature is between 15 and 18 degrees. Okay. So, and
that's always pretty constant?
Yeah, pretty constant. Okay. But I mean, once it kicks off, it will start to generate heat. Okay. So that malt will be, you know, respiration will be happening. So it'll be releasing carbon dioxide, and it'll be releasing heat, and that heat will build up. We don't want it too hot. Okay. So that's why we turn it to release some of the heat from the malt.
And is the carbon dioxide, do you need to release that as well? Is that part of the...
Yeah. Effectively the malt is breathing. So, you know, you need to get rid of that carbon dioxide so it can actually continue to germinate.
And do you always, is there like a sequence in terms of, like, we saw some of the different pieces of equipment we use, like, you know, the grubber, the flapping machine, the shovels. Do you use the same things in the same sequence each time, or is there?
Not necessarily, but it tends to be fairly consistent. You know, we're fairly experienced on that malt floor now, so we know that the first couple of days we'll not be doing too much. We'll just be monitoring temperatures. Day 2, 3, we'll be turning the malt with the rake, and on the 4th and the 5th day, the electric grubber, as we call it, will be there to separate the rootlets and keep that nice and loose.
And is it always 5 days?
Well, that's what we plan. You know, if for various reasons the germination has picked up and is sped up, we can actually terminate it earlier, or we can actually leave it down a day later. But of course, we've got a steeping process just behind the floor that's already down. Okay. Yeah. So it's
all in sequence.
It's in sequence. Yeah. So yeah, we need to keep on top of it.
Okay. And there's quite a few of you guys in there now, isn't there?
Yeah, we've got some new additions. You know, 3 or 4 months ago, there was only 2 of us.
You brought in a bit of muscle.
Yeah,
not that you're not muscly.
I am a pretty muscly. Yeah,
a little bit sunburnt actually, isn't it?
Yeah, I got a glow on. Yeah. But no, we've got 5 people that potentially can work on the malt floor at any one time. But you know, within that group of people, we kind of multitask, and
Yeah.
2 or 3 of us are trained up as relief cover for the still house. So that will alter the way we do our business.
You guys kind of do all the, I was going to say grunt work, but that sounds like it's
Yeah,
you do a lot more of the kind of manual processes,
Yes,
isn't it? So the
yeah.
turning the malt, the moving the malt, the moving the cast, the stowing, that.
It's a physical job.
Yeah.
So turning the malt floor and thinning it, moving the
Yeah.
malt out, spreading it out, thickening it, turning the malt while it's in the kiln every
Yeah.
2 hours.
So every 2 hours.
When there's 4 tons of malt
Okay.
in the kiln, it's very thick, and so you have to turn it
Yeah.
manually with a fork every 2 hours.
Right.
And the same with stowing in the warehouse. It's a manual physical task. So yeah.
Right. Okay. So we've got some more questions coming in. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on Peat. Then we'll go back and we'll quick fire through the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you're a bit of a Peat connoisseur.
Yeah, that's not the word I'd use. But
Yeah. You like to spend just your spring days alone in the peat bog.
Not always alone. No.
Okay. Well, we'll leave that there. But, so Peat.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about peat, because you actually cut the peat that we use.
Well, I cut the peat. I've been cutting peat this is my 3rd season now, and I just love that. It's another physical activity. It's something primeval about collecting your own fuel. There's a bit of an art to it. You can do it various ways, and there's lots of advice here in Islay how to do it.
I'm sure, yeah.
I got lots of passing experts.
Did anyone tell you you're doing it right?
Most people say that I keep a tidy bank.
Tidy bag?
A tidy bank.
Oh, bank.
Bank,
Yeah, right.
But normally they'll offer advice on how they used to do it when they were younger. Because remember, you look around Islay, you drive around Islay, and there's peat banks everywhere.
Yeah.
And there's only a handful of people now hand cutting peat. So it's a tradition. I like a traditional way of doing things.
And it's a seasonal thing, isn't it? So
Yes, we're cutting right now. Some people have finished cutting, but the spring, April, May, June tends to be the months where we cut, because it's good drying. We've got a nice dry wind for drying the peat when it's on the moss.
Is it always wet? So you could cut peat any time of year, but it's the drying of the peat is better in the spring then.
A lot of moss, is exactly that. Sphagnum moss is one of the big components of our peat moss here in Islay, and they're very good at holding the water.
Yeah.
And when you do cut the peat, it's muddy, it's slimy and wet. I mean, I've got an example of a peat. I did show an example the other day, and that was quite. You can feel it's still quite.
Yeah.
So that's been laid down like that.
Okay.
And now it's been dried a bit. It's got a skin, what we call a skin. It's almost waterproof.
So how long has it been drying on that side?
About a week.
Okay, so not long at all.
Not
really.
long at all. So it's got a skin.
Yeah.
It's still heavy though, and holds a lot of moisture. So we'll turn that now, and then it'll get another skin.
Yeah.
So it's almost waterproof effectively.
Yeah. Then
we can set it up in stooks, and little.
Yeah, the little almost like little peat teepees, aren't they?
Or windows crisscross.
Okay.
And then that's the final drying process. So you're hoping for some good weather, some good winds, and that'll do the final drying. And that of course, is the top peat. So that's full of fibers. And then you've got
it's slightly lighter in color, isn't it?
Lighter in color, more fibrous. And this is the older. So this will be the peat underneath. So it's darker. And this provides more heat in the fire. The top peat will give you that nice peaty smoke.
This is much heavier and denser, isn't
Heavier
it?
and denser, almost like gold, black gold.
So this is, we actually were talking about it just before we came on. So this is more like what you might burn at home because you get heat.
Yeah. But in the old days, of course, it didn't really matter what it was.
Yeah.
They were cutting to heat the home. So it didn't matter, but I'd prefer to burn this in my fire than this.
Yeah,
really,
sell this to
the choice.
the distillery. But that's got, am I right in saying that the top peat has maybe got more smoky, phenolic flavor in it?
I would say so,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, so that is ideal for actually burning in the kiln.
And how much peat do we use to per batch, per 4-ton batch?
Our fire, it tends to be on for about 10 hours. And on that 10-hour burning process, we can go through about 3 to 4 bags of peat. So 30, 35 peats perhaps, depending on that. But we tend to use, once we've got the fire going, a hot fire to start, And then we'll try and cool that down by adding crumbly dross onto it. So that's when we get that real.
It's like a smouldering. It looks a bit like a sort of a leaf fire almost.
Yes, yeah. White smoke.
Yeah,
that's what we want.
Okay, and then questions that have come in. So, do we experiment with using like heather or juniper with the peat?
No, we're just using peat cut on the banks of Loch Gorm, local peat, and it doesn't travel far. However, around the world, there are distilleries using peat, which is made up of different herbs and different plant life. So I would imagine that there is significant flavor influences from that peat.
Yeah. And do all varieties of barley require the same time on the malt floor?
Not necessarily. The germination rates are slightly different, I've noticed. From Diablo to Concerto, Sassy, slightly different. But of course, we've got all the tools and all the experience to alter that germination process and keep it nice and constant.
Ultimately, you're trying to get all the different varieties of barley to the same place, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and then what do you do with the water that is drained off the steep?
That's considered effluent, really. So that will go away with all the other wastewater, and that will be taken away and disposed of.
And how much longer do you need to peat the barley to get a higher ppm? So there was another question later on. So is there a chance of like 70 to 100 ppm? So say, at the moment it's 15, 20 ppm for the 100% Islay.
Yeah.
How long do you think it would take to get up to 70 or 100
That's a good question. Really, Anthony's considered some heavily peated malts in the future. So I think it may be a bit of experimentation.
Yeah.
We can get a sample tested, and we do that every now and then. So we'll send the sample off to actually reassure us that we're around about the 20 ppm. Yeah. But I suppose if we did a longer peating, we'd experiment and then get a sample sent away just to.
Yeah, but it diminishes, doesn't it? So you get more smoke, and then it kind of, as you get longer, it's not like every hour you get 5 more ppm, is it? It sort of diminishes, I think. So there's more of a statement, perhaps. 5 days is short compared to other distilleries who are doing 7 or more. Mm-hmm. I guess that's maybe just to do with our buildings, our barley.
Yeah, our capacity. We're doing. We're only doing 2 tons at the minute. Compared to some distilleries, we are actually very small. Yeah. But there are moves afoot to actually expand the malt floor. So our maximum at the moment is 4 tons. So we could potentially double that, and it may affect the actual the timings and our program of malting.
Okay. And then with more and more distilleries in Islay, how our lease levels, I don't know what that means, but is there a concern about the environmental impact of use of peat? I guess maybe that's a tricky question.
Well, it's a tricky question, but I would say with Kilchoman, the quantities of peat we use is minuscule compared with some of the heavily peated whiskies.
You were saying 35 peats, so roughly 35 of those per week.
No, that's a dried peat.
Okay.
So compared with a wet peat. So,
so a big wheelbarrow.
A couple of wheelbarrows, and for the whole year, it's not a huge amount of peat. Yeah. I would say it's kind of most environmentally friendly.
And as you said, I guess to put it in context of peat use on Islay, I sometimes say that it's at an all-time low. The amount of peat that's being used now, even though as much as ever is being used for making whiskey or smoking malted barley, then you're one of very few people who cut peat.
A handful of people. And as I say, if you walk around,
they're all lazy. Yeah?
If you walk around the open hill on Islay, even in the wild country, you will find
as opposed to the metropolis of
way up the back of this, up the glen. Not many people visit that ground, and you will come across peat banks. So when there was a bigger population on Islay, there were peat banks in use all the time, and it was a community thing. Communities helped each other cut the peat, and it was a big thing.
So another question here: does the peaty water in the steep make a difference, or is it purely the peat on the fire that gives the distinctive flavour?
I think the influence would be minuscule.
From the
main,
water,
yeah. The main influence is from the peat smoke.
Yeah, it seems, I don't know who's been telling people that peaty water makes peaty whiskey, but it seems to be something that people think is, I can't see the link there personally, but maybe it has an impact for very, very subtle whiskies. Certainly not for when you're smoking. Any smoking of the barley is going to completely overtake any peaty water, isn't it?
And I think the main differences, as we were discussing earlier on, the immediate differences is that new spirit coming off the stills, and perhaps you can. I don't know.
Different waters. I mean, I have trouble blind tasting different waters. I think you have trouble to see it. But so I think the main, to answer the question, I think, peat is in the water minimal.
Yeah,
but
minimal.
And then I guess after the floor malting, the peating, the drying process, I guess when the drying was all done by peat, the peat levels must be much higher. But these days we smoke the barley while it's still moist, then we use the air drying.
That's right. The drying will halt that germination process. I mean, really, 10 hours isn't going to make a huge amount of difference to the process of germination. But as soon as that dryer's on, that's when we're halting it. So.
And do you ever talk to Robin about certain batches maybe being better than others in terms of how much whiskey you make? Looking at that convert, the amount of sugar or whatever. Do you ever look at that?
I think again, there's so many factors, but we look at yields more from the distillation process. However, the malting does affect that. So who does the better job? It's difficult to tell, but your yield is at the end of the distillation is the key figure.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Enlightening as always. There have been a few questions about things like casks and stuff like that. We're going to have my dad and I think Robin also later talking, more, and they're more probably involved in the cask selection. So it'd probably be more a question for them. But next up at 3 is going to be Robin in the still house with Peat. So that video will be going up at 3 o'clock, and then Robin will be here for a Q&A following that. So have a watch, think of all the questions you can, and who knows what Robin will come up with to answer them. There's never a dull moment. But thanks very much for joining, and we'll see you at 3 or 3:30 for live.
Gotcha.